My name is Britt Kemp. I work at Bishop Fox. I'm the community manager there, which is essentially, like, in other words, I am the social media go-to person. But that being said, besides handling social media, I've done a fair share of content creation in my time at Bishop Fox. And to tie back to your third point, I I wrote a blog post about 2 years ago on how to write a winning CFP, and I have in the past done a few CFP reviews at my company, and I've also promoted the heck out of every event that we do, and I get to see the actual speaking abstracts and whatnot of events that go to like DEF CON, Black Hat, etc. And I've been involved with a few submissions that have been picked for selection at those conferences. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share what I've learned. I'm also happy to share what I've picked up at Bishop Fox. And I will point out too, I've been there for about 9 years as of April. So I've been there for quite a bit. And yeah, anything I can pass on today that's useful, will definitely do my best.
Awesome. So just my first question, which is going to be an absolutely naive question. It's mainly for the listeners who might have a chance of submitting a CFP in the future. They don't essentially know the concept of CFP. So would you just break it down in a layman's language? What exactly CFP is?
Yeah, CFP stands for Call for Papers. It's when a conference or a meetup or anything else that's like a speaking event, they pull out like again a call for papers. Essentially, they just want people to submit ideas. Now, I mean, it varies from conference to conference, but I've seen all kinds of different guidelines. Like some conferences are very, or whatever you want to call it, whatever venue is putting out the CFP request. Some places are a bit more detail oriented than others. Some places are more casual. And usually you can find their website, like tends to be like an area where it talks about like, CFPs, submissions, etc. And you can see their requirements. I mean, you have the basic foundation, right? You have like the title, like an abstract. Definitely, they might ask for an outline, which I mean is I think that's good to have anyway, just in case, like to be able to like outline your talk the way that you would best be able to deliver it or think would be most worthwhile. But also they might ask for like resources or references, like what's like basically to cite your research, whatever you're going to be talking about. I mean, if it's not research, it's something else. They might ask for like a bio, they might ask for photos, but again, it varies from for the sake of this Twitter Spaces event, I'm just going to say conference. So it varies from conference to conference. I mean, I think there's like usually an accepted sort of format, but there's really no like hard rules. So basically when I talk about CFP submission, it's what you submit to the call for papers. You put in like, they'll usually give you a due date, like they want CFP like by a certain date. And yeah, usually like, you just email them whatnot, and sometimes they'll respond to you if they haven't approved your CFP, they haven't accepted it, and sometimes they might not, but hopefully you'll get an acceptance from them.
Yeah, got you absolutely clear. So, are you a little aware about the origin of CFPs? Like, how did CFPs come about?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit from my experience. I think what I've heard, and I could be like, maybe this isn't what other people have seen, maybe this is other people's experience, but I think really the CFP, what it comes down to, and I don't know if this is the exactly origin, but I think it's just because the conference organizers, they want to make sure that you have a fully baked idea on your hands. And if it's not fully baked, they want to know that you put some thought into it, that it's not just something by the seat of your pants or something that's like, very, it might sound good, but it's not something that could come to fruition. So really, from what I gather, it's just ensuring that the speaker has done their due diligence and that this is like something that, like, oh, okay, this sounds cool, but there's no substance there. You know what I mean?
Just shared it pretty clear, how CFPs came about and why this concept was introduced. So let me head on to one of the direct questions, which is who are eligible to submit a CFP? How subjective is CFP?
Well, again, I think it really does depend on the conference. I mean, again, like I said, conference, I'm using that as a catch-all for this Twitter Spaces. But as long as like, that you meet the requirements, because usually, for example, I'll have it on like like some conferences are more geared toward women, right? Some conferences have like special like requirements for speakers, like, this person needs to be specialized in this area, etc. I mean, from what I've seen, it does really just vary from speaking engagement type situation to speaking type situation. Sorry, I'm a little tired. It's kind of later in the day here. But yeah, I mean, as long as the conference doesn't say that, like, like their guidelines will usually give you an indication if you're eligible, you're not eligible. I mean, and again, it comes back to, like I just said, doing your due diligence, doing some research and making sure that this event that you're submitting a CFP for is a good fit for you. And as long as it is, or like you have some knowledge of the area, you meet the qualifications, you have some sort of like familiarity, I mean, you should be good in my opinion. I mean, you don't want to go to a conference, like submit a CFP to something that you might not like have a shot for. You don't want to, like, if you're just starting to submit CFPs, you might want to start with like a smaller event or a smaller like meetup, something that's a little bit more easier to penetrate, you know what I mean? You don't want to go necessarily for the lofty like black hat type conference, like right off the get-go. But yeah, I mean, again, it really just comes down to like who you are, what you're like going to present about, what you're interested in, and also like what the conference is. For example, I work in marketing. I would not submit a CFP to a mechanics conference. You know what I mean? Like, that's just like would be really out of left field. But yeah, like, I mean, and it comes down to a bit of like due diligence, like also starting small. If you're somebody, again, that's not super familiar with doing a CFPs, and I imagine most of the audience here has like some idea but isn't super acquainted with it, and as well too, like making sure that like like there's nothing that would prevent you really from speaking there. And also, like, this is going to sound a little bit I mean, it sounds very obvious, but make sure that the dates work out for you too for the actual event. So if you do get accepted, it's not like when you have to go to like a wedding, or you have like a vacation planned or something that like you could say, oh yeah, I could actually attend that, which again sounds common sense, but sometimes people forget about that.
That's so true. I mean, there are so many factors which are kind of, taken into context and consideration when a CFP gets accepted. So we are now going to delve a little deeper into each of those components. So you have mentioned due diligence quite a number of times
Yes.
while you were explaining different stuffs. So when you're talking about due diligence, who are the people who should do the maximum due diligence? Is it the speaker side or the organizer side? Who should be doing it more?
Oh, you know what? I would have to say I think it's the speaker side, because really the people that are going to be reviewing the submissions, the ball is in their court. I mean, I wouldn't suggest for people that are like, on the review boards or review committees listening to me today, like I wouldn't suggest that they don't like, delve, like they don't do a little bit of I guess like legwork. Like they don't do some like research on the speaker. They don't read like the CFP fully, because that happens to all of us. Sometimes like we're tired, or like we're really busy with other things and we don't pay attention to a submission. But for then like I would just say like being careful and like actually like reading what comes in, and like maybe doing a little bit of like a Google search on the speaker and seeing where else that they have spoken at, or where they work at, stuff like that, if it's not immediately apparent. But going back to what I originally said, I would totally say 100% hands down the speaker, because you're really trying to make an impression with the committee or whoever is reviewing that, like your CFP submission. You really want to make sure that like it doesn't come across like you're just kind of, for lack of a better term, half-assing things, So I would say, when it comes to being a speaker, you're really trying to market yourself, put your best foot forward, trying to like show that like you should be able to speak at this conference, you should be able to present at this meetup, whatever, like you have what it takes to like put on an interesting presentation. And you don't have to be like the best speaker in the room. You really don't have to be like some sort of like Barack Obama type person. But I mean, at the same time, like, like making sure that your CFP actually has depth to it, and there's things that you can really speak to, and maybe like again, like I said, you might not be the best speaker, but you can at least know your subject matter. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. We're going to head on to this particular question, or shall I just give you a hypothetical situation? For example,
Go for it.
um, For example, let's say that there is a person who is absolutely like a newbie, haven't given any speech, haven't attended any event, but the person has a lot of faith, has a lot of knowledge in whichever domain the person is working in, and he or she just kind of gets to know that, okay, there is a concept of CFP, that I can actually send a proposal and I can go and speak at an event. Now what happens when, as organizers of an event and being on the review board of an event, many people are going to decide that, hey, I'm going to take in experienced speakers who have done other speaking engagements, who have worked in the industry, who have been present in the conferences. But you know what? This particular proposal, which is sent by a newbie, has a lot of potential. This person might not be a speaker, have probably never spoken at any engagement, but the proposal the person has written is amazing. So, what does like a review person do in this particular case?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. I mean, I've worked with people that have been on review boards for like DEF CON, and I know there's somebody at my company that's on the review board for, or was on the review board for the Diana Initiative. I mean, from what I gather, the people that are actually reviewing the submissions and deciding if they're worthwhile or not, they're really just looking at like the quality of the content, and as well, like, of course you want to present it, the best way possible, but at the same time, if the content's not there, you're probably not going to get accepted, or if you do, it could be one of those situations you just referred to where it's like you have something else going for you, like not in this hypothetical situation, this person has never spoken before, but maybe like they're familiar with something that you did like at work or whatever. There's like a million factors that go into someone that's like picking somebody over content. But as far as like the review board submissions go for, I mean, just in my experience, because again, I will say this is not an area I'm super familiar with. I'm more familiar with the other side where it's like submitting, but like, I mean, they're looking out for their conference at the end of the day, for their event, whatever it happens to be. They're looking to make sure they get the best possible submission. So, I mean, maybe this person is a newbie. They don't have a lot like to their name quite yet, but there is always the chance that the content is good enough, like, just going back to what I said, like if the content's there, like that's really what's going to make the presentation. I mean, in some cases, they will be willing to like, push you forward and make you like, approve you to actually speak at the conference. This has happened before. I know at Bishop Fox, there's been instances in the past where people got accepted to like, I think it was Black Hat or something. It was either Black Hat or another major conference, not DEF CON, but I think it was Black Hat. And he had really never spoken before, but the quality of his research was so good. And the CFP itself was very easy to read. And it was also like really just, because I know I talked about this in the blog post where the CFP kind of is like almost like a movie trailer to your presentation, right? It's like the little condensed version that's going to grab people's interest. And of course, there's the bottom half of the pyramid too, where it's like your outline and your resources, any additional details, etc. But if it's presented in a really compelling and just digestible way, I mean, that's going to like, take you farther in the submission process than something that's a little bit more dense, or maybe it's just not super coherent. So,
Are there biases about accepting CFPs? Like, do you see biases when you're on a review board? Like, I know I don't want you to spill names or anything, just be anonymous and give like a neutral review. Do biases work in deciding which review to accept?
oh, I mean, like, I'm like, I would like to think that people, when they're on review boards, they're going to look aside certain factors. They're not going to, but we're all human at the end of the day. So, yeah, biases exist for sure. And maybe, like, you've spoken at, like, 6 conferences and they see your name and you get, like, a little bit more of a, oh, this person's great. Or they see your name and they're like, I've never heard of this person before. And they're, like, more likely not to pay attention to your submission that closely. Now, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but I wouldn't be surprised if this happened, a fair amount. And I think it would probably be more with, I mean, like, I honestly, I personally can't, like, speak to any experience I've had where I felt like there was a bias, but it would be really, like, it would be really naive of me not to think that there are people out there that might have a little bit more bias, a little bit more, like, likelihood to inch something forward if it's a, someone that they're maybe connected with, or maybe, like, there's someone that, like, they worked with in the past, or maybe it's not even like, like a guaranteed surefire thing, but the door opens a little bit wider just because, there's that familiarity there. There's that sort of like, oh, okay, like, the CFP have something going for them, whereas somebody that might be like totally out of thin air, this might be their first CFP ever, they have a little bit more of a uphill battle against any sort of biases. And I'm inclined to say that I'm not like a a psychologist or whatever, so take this with what you will, that humans always have biases. It's like the same thing about humans always judge things, because that's just how our brains are wired. But it's also like, we're capable of fighting back against those. So, and I would say though, like if someone's submitting to a CFP for the first time, like a call for CFPs, if someone is like a call for papers rather, if someone's really just starting and they're very intimidated and scared by this prospect, and they think that like they're going to be looked over because they don't have the right like criteria, there's going to be a bias working against them, I would say like try not to dwell on that, because honestly at the end of the day you're not going to know, and there's no reason to like freak yourself out thinking like that.
In this particular session of decoding CFPs, now we come into the most important points. When somebody is considering to write a CFP, what are the top 5 things that you want them to keep in mind and include in their proposal, no matter what?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, top 5 things. Number one, I actually did put out like a little bit of a call for crowdsourced wisdom from my colleagues about like, what they think a winning CFP submission should look like. And this is something that I already was aware of, but, seeing that it came up first from when I did that, like my colleague was like, this is so important. And number one, having an outline. Number one, like that's going to help you formulate your talk, your presentation, your slide deck. That will help you like get into the cadence of your talk, your presentation, whatever it is. It will also help you really think about everything going on. So even if you don't get accepted and you end up recycling the submission or whatever, you still have like a holistic view of how your talk will work. And as well too, for the review committees, that gives them the chance to see that you did like you did like your due diligence. I feel like it could be like a drinking game at this point whenever I say that, but it shows that you've done like the actual work, that you have an idea that's worth exploring. And also too, it shows them like what they can expect, that there's nothing that's going to be like really out of left field, and also that you will have a presentation. I mean, I've heard horror stories too of like things going wrong last minute, demos not working, whatever. I mean, at least an outline can be sort of your roadmap to make sure that you don't run into any issues like that. Another thing I would definitely have people include is a bio. Especially if you're a new speaker, new to conferences, new to like, just like even meetups, anything, whatever, have a bio, and have an up-to-date bio. It doesn't have to be the most ornate, like, flowing novel in the world, but it should give us like a elevator pitch of who you are, like what your credentials are, and why, like, you're worth considering. I mean, you can look at like DEF CON from years past, or RSA or whatever, and get a feel for other speakers' bios and model your own on theirs, because I mean there's a general formula to how those go, but they seem really minor, but they're super super important. Also too, number 3, I would say, I mean, the title like is very 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 like important, because for a title, A, you have to catch people's attention in a short amount of time, and B, you have to really convey like what you're saying, and you don't need to really be like the most catchy title in the world. You don't need something that's super flashy or witty or whatever. I mean, it helps if you have that for sure, but if as long as you have what you're speaking about, like as long as you have like what your subject is going to be about, and it's in the title somewhere, that helps again like open people's mind to like your actual presentation. And even if you do get accepted, when the audience is deciding if they want to come to your talk or not, that's going to help them make an informed decision, because if they're not going to read your title, or they get bored or don't move past your title, I mean the rest of the abstract isn't going to matter. And going on number 4, I would say definitely having a well thought out abstract, which plays off the outline a little bit, because they have like a symbiotic relationship yet. It's like one is just the condensed version of the other. One's like the tip of the iceberg, one's the bottom of the iceberg, right? But for your abstract, you're going to want to say like what people can expect. You're going to kind of like treat it like a high school essay where it's going to have like a beginning, a middle, and end. And you're going to really want to use that time to like put in relevant keywords to your presentation. Say you're speaking about Kubernetes, or you plan to, or you're just doing your CFP at this point. Like you're going to want to put in Kubernetes, you're going to put in K8s, you're going to want to put in, anything that's like Docker, anything that is relevant, because that way, like you're already like, what you're trying to do basically is keep the review boards interest, keep them enthralled in what you're explaining to them, and keep them like wanting more, and like being of the mindset that your CFP submission is worth accepting, that there's something valuable to be said there. And as far as, for the last thing I would say for the CFP submission, I think this is probably like outside the outline and like that having a well thought out abstract. I think this is probably the most important thing, and it's really not like a factor, but it's more like a sanity check. Making sure that you've like adhered to all the guidelines. And sometimes, like I said earlier, like conferences are more chill than others, but making sure that you hit like every single mark, because you don't want, like, what you don't want to happen is that you have a really amazing CFP submission, but you didn't meet all their criteria, and there's something really small, really something minor, and probably very trite, that could hold you back from making it to the next round. So yeah, just having, again, the outline, having the bio that's up to date, shows who you are, having a good title, having a good abstract, and then just making sure that you're meeting all the criteria, all the guidelines that you've like. And also too, and this plays off that last bit, is making sure too that you submitted a good time. There's a lot of people, when I have done more CFP submissions in my life, there's a lot of people that wait till the last minute, and I would advise not doing that, even though I know that's like really tempting and it's so easy to do. I do it all the time too. I procrastinate all the time, but you don't want that like to be a factor going against you as well.
Number one is you spoke about, a bio, a speaker's bio, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
what are the few things that a speaker should mention in the bio that kind of sets the speaker apart?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, again, there's like a formula to them, but I would make sure that your bio is very relevant. It's not too long. It's to the point, but it shows like what your qualifications are. Outside of my full-time job at Bishop Fox, I do a lot of resume reviews for random people. It used to be just like friends and family, but the floodgates have since opened. And resume is very similar, right? Because you're trying to sell yourself for a position, you're trying to sell yourself for a job. Whereas a bio, you're trying to sell yourself for a CFP submission. So yeah, you're gonna want to have like what qualifies you to speak there, but showing like your experience in a very high level way, which is kind of an art, saying that like maybe you worked as a pen tester for 6 years at this company, and before that you were a security analyst at this company, and you have like two decades of cybersecurity experience, like showing that, having it come across. And you've done research. Maybe you've not submitted your research in the past, but yeah, you've done it. So you have an outline in your bio. And other things that you can speak to, like maybe you haven't spoken at a conference before, or even spoken at a meetup. Maybe you've done bug bounties and like got like a huge bounty on some like a cross-site scripting bug you found in some random software. Something like that is really impactful. But again, like making sure it sort of lines up with the presentation or the conference that you're submitting to. If your bio is all about like security stuff and you're submitting to like a human resources conference, this is all like theoretical. It's not going to really, the connection is not going to be there. And another thing I would just advise people to is like, some people like to be really fun with their bios, and I think that's cool. But if you're going to do that, just make sure it's still relevant. Like you don't go off the deep end trying to be witty and like smarmy with your bio. Just kind of like, have some lightness to it, but don't go too far down that path, because that could give the wrong impression, and also it could look a little glib. So
Give you the second hypothetical situation of this space, and that is, what if somebody has not actually done enough things to put in the bio, but is a potential speaker, is a potential writer? What do you tell that kind of a person? How do they approach a CFP?
at that point, obviously you have an interest and a passion for the area that you're going to be you're hopefully going to be speaking in. So going down that road, I would say build up your interest, your passions. Like, you don't have to have a very long bio, as I said before, but you can have something that shows, like, you really have expertise in XYZ area, or you're interested in XYZ. I mean, just because you're not doing something professionally, or maybe it's not something that you're doing, like, even it's just like a passion project for you, just build that up, like, expand on that. And of course, you don't want to, like, like, make things up, but the fact that you have an interest and a passion for this area, whatever it may be, I would focus on that, because I know some of the best speakers I've personally seen may have not been experts on certain subjects, but they were interested in it. And that interest is really going to show off in the writing that, you do for the CFP submission, and the way that you speak. So yeah, like, if you're at a loss and you don't have, even like much professional experience to point to, like, just get creative. It's easier said than done, I know, but just showing the bit of interest you have in things that you wouldn't even think that might be applicable. I mean, you could have alluded them in there. Perhaps you build, like, home hardware hacking labs in your spare time. Throw that in there if that's relevant. Stuff like that.
So, you have spoken about writing down a title that gets accepted, that motivates and propels people to take interest in your particular speaking event. So, when you're talking about like a catchy title, I have certain questions that I definitely like to put forward. That is, you know. How do you want people to write their titles? Do you want them to be very sophisticatedly written, or you want them to be humorous? Like, what really gets accepted? Is it like the humor kind you put in, or too much of seriousness into the title?
Honestly, I would say the best road for this approach, if you're, like, again, you're doing this for the first time, I play it safe. Like, in my experience, I think with the best titles, maybe they have a little bit of humor, and if you can pull it off and it makes sense, go for it. I mean, super serious isn't great either, but at the same time, you want a title that's informative. And I would say that's probably the thing that I would think is the most important, having an informative title. And also, you can kind of treat it like, like search engine optimization. Like, think about, like, the articles you're most likely to click on when you're browsing the internet, or like what web pages, get your attention when you're just, like, doom scrolling at night. Like, think about the way those are structured. Usually, like, maybe they'll be a little bit, like, provocative. Even though that's not the right word, but you know what I mean. Like, they'll be a little bit, like, they'll get your interest a little, but they'll also show you, like, what that article is about, or what that web page is about. And a CFP is very similar. So I would say, above any sort of, like, tricks that you can throw at the review board, I'd say having a good, like, informative title, like, just showing what the title is about, not burying it, or the title, the submission's about, not burying it, like, at the last paragraph of your abstract or whatever. You want it to be up front, like, this is what my talk's about, this is what my research is about, this is what I want to speak on. Just be direct.
Okay, now I'm going to be very direct to you and ask you this particular following up question. And that is, where do I learn how to write a CFP?
Oh gosh, you know what? I think the best thing I could say to someone about this is go out there and see what's been accepted in the past. Or, like, if it doesn't have to be the presentation you want to speak at. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be just, like, presentations in that subject area. See what has gone before you, like, see what other people have done, and don't copy them, but, like, use that as kind of, like, inform your approach. Like, see what other people are doing. How are they constructing things, going out there and just seeing what other people have done and what's worked. I will say too, I know, like, places like DEF CON, they usually have CFP, like, helpful hints or recommendations that they publish every so often. Other conferences might do similar things, at least bigger conferences. Smaller conferences, probably not so much. But going out there and seeing, like, if there's any sort of, like, hey, like, this is how you write, like, a CFP that we'll actually read, that kind of thing. And seeing too what other people have done in the past, what's been accepted. And that might be cool too. Just, like, inform yourself. If you're looking at a conference that you want to accept at, and you're looking at last year's submissions, and you see a talk or whatever that looks a lot like what you're about to submit, like the idea is similar, like the subject matter is very similar, then maybe you want to go a different direction, or maybe you want to, like, like take some time and rethink your CFP idea.
What are the skills that you would want like a prospective potential speaker should have before writing a CFP? Because I assume that CFP is much like another work or another job that you should actually consider doing, because it requires space, time, your energy in crafting out a CFP that actually gets accepted. So list down like the important skills that somebody should possess, so that it helps them craft a really compelling CFP, and in the longer term they get established as a speaker.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say definitely the ability to market yourself a bit. Like, I mean, I know it's really like awkward sometimes to really like sell yourself, but not being afraid to dip into that and just kind of like treat it like you would treat any sort of other thing that you would be applying to. Like, you have to make sure that you stand apart a little bit. You have to make sure that you're interesting. You have to make sure that people like you could get people's attention, basically. So I would say that is very important, and it's an underrated skill, and the people that can do it well can do it really, really well, but it's not something that like most people pick up overnight. It's a skill that you hone over time. I mean, think about like your first resume that you ever wrote. I'm sure it was probably very rough. My first resume I ever wrote in high school was probably terrifying. But I mean, like over time, you get better at that skill. You get better because you have more chances to improve it. So I would say that's important. As well, I would say thoughtfulness, being aware of what's going into the abstract, into the title, into like the outline, whatever. Being very thoughtful about what you're doing, not just kind of like rushing through it. And that's another reason that I would recommend not waiting till the last minute of CFP submissions. I would say try to give yourself a little bit of time to like submit. Make sure that you're really thinking about what you're putting in there. And if you have the ability to like get someone else's opinion, like for example, I brought up that I have looked at CFPs in the past, part of work. Once in a while I've helped people with them, like, but I would say if I was submitting a talk, like a talk idea, and I have done this in the past myself, having a trusted friend or somebody that's judgment I really, really value look at what I'm about to submit. Because sometimes we put on those blinders when we're looking at our own things, that we don't really see them fully, or maybe we're too harsh on ourselves or whatever. But yeah, being like, be able to tap into someone else is helpful too. But that just goes back to being thoughtful. You really want to be just very considerate about like what you're putting in there. Really think about what you're trying to get through. And also too, like really think about like the talk. Like if you do get accepted, like are you going to be able to execute in the amount of time that you have available, stuff like that, little factors that you might like, it might be easy to bypass. I would also say too, I think creativity can go a long way, but I would say that has to be a little bit of a delicate art, just because you don't want to get too creative. That could be kind of cringy. It could be overwhelming. And also too, like going back to being considerate, be considerate of the review board. Be considerate of like the person that's going to actually read your CFP. Be considerate about like their time. And, like when you're writing, don't try to like bury things or hedge away from what you're trying to say, because they probably likely have like tons of submissions to go through, and they don't really have, I would imagine, a lot of time. So you don't want to like make them feel like they're spending a lot of time on the submission when they don't actually have to. And who knows, maybe they will have to. Maybe you're trying to give like a physics presentation or something like that. But for the most part, you can probably be a little bit more economic with your words, what you're trying to get across, and not make people like really have to scratch their heads when they're looking at your submission.
That as like a review board member, Britt, what were the factors based on which you accepted a proposal and you rejected a proposal?
Well, I personally have not really been a part of many review boards. I've usually been on the other end, but what I will say from what I know is that usually the things that people have accepted in my experience, and I know folks that have done CFP submissions and like they've looked at tons of them, things that they've said. definitely like the bit of like thoughtfulness, making sure that the research seems to be there, the idea is interesting, that the stuff is novel. It's not something that people have seen time and time and time and time again. We all see those presentations when we go online, right? Like you on LinkedIn, you see people presenting similar, like maybe webinars, similar, like, I work in marketing, and there's a lot of like really like common ideas that people seem to harp on in the industry, which is fine. There's a reason people harp on them. But the things that get my attention when I'm trying to look for like a webinar or like a video to check out about a certain topic, and I want to see something that's a little bit different, and I know for a fact for review boards it's very, very similar. So yeah, showing some novelty, showing again that like things are thought out, things seem to be like practical. Like, can this presentation actually happen? Like, is this something that actually shows this person knows what they're talking about? Stuff like that, like considerations like that. So again, being a bit mindful. And I know what, like, some things I've heard like in the past, or some things I've seen be rejected, tend to be things that are a little bit like, it just doesn't look like the concept is there. Maybe it's overdone. And maybe too, like the way the concept's being presented is not so great. And that way, like, it might be a great idea, like the content might be there, but the fact that it's like so hard to distinguish, that could be a factor going against being accepted as a CFP, prospective speaker or whatnot.
Right, great. Since you earlier mentioned that, if you want to learn how to write a CFP that gets accepted, or just learn how to write a CFP, go look into the presentations of speakers whose submissions have been accepted, and people who have spoken at this events, which is a great way to start, because I think just following random resources out on the internet maybe is not going to do much of a help. Instead, looking into the people who have already done the work that you have done, it definitely adds a lot of credibility. So that brings me to ask you this particular question: do you have any learning resources that you will recommend people go and take a look at, like any person who can actually help those people get started into the entire world of speaking at conferences, meetups, and everything else, and some online courses or some events, or whatever, like some sort of resources that helps people constantly to keep updated with how they are going to present their proposals in the event? Please share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. I mean, again, like I did write that blog post a few years ago. Probably could use a little bit of it's pretty evergreen content, so I don't think it's like terribly outdated or anything. But I mean, in that blog post, it does link to the DEF CON Speakers Corner, which is the official like CFP resource from DEF CON. And DEF CON is such a major conference. Even if you're not in the security industry, it's still one of the bigger conferences in the world. So getting their recommendations, their thoughts, their guidelines, like what, or like, like their insight into this matter, like that's invaluable as well. There's tons of YouTube videos about speaking, how to craft a submission, things of that nature. You'll find that online pretty easily. There's tons of resources out there. I mean, it's hard to narrow down like what I would recommend the best. But also too, if you're like afraid to like, if you're a little bit reticent about speaking, maybe you have the CFP down pat, but it's the actual speaking part that might be frightening for you. I would say that there's plenty of great opportunities to get involved with like Discord servers, local meetups, maybe like a local club like that's interested or target around your interest area. See if you can do a small presentation with them. Even again, like going back to our Discord server, we used to do on our Discord server, we used to do the like speaking workshops, and I mean, I'd be happy to bring that back in the future if that's something people saw like interest, saw usefulness from. Another thing too, as far as resources go, that like again, like not on the CFP side of things, but actually it could probably help you tailor your CFP a little bit as well as prepare you to be a speaker, is Toastmasters. Toastmasters is fantastic. I used to go there when I was younger. Love to start going there again.
Even I'm a Toastmaster.
Are you? Yeah, it's such a great resource, and people don't think about it. But Toastmasters is like I think it's phenomenal, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend anybody that wants to do conferences and speak at like all kinds of events to get involved with it. Other things that you can look into, goodness, I mean, just seeing what's out there. Like social media is such a great way to connect with people that can help you. Perhaps, like there's somebody that's been speaking at a lot of conferences that you are interested in speaking at, and maybe it's somebody that you like look up to a little bit. I mean, perhaps like if they're active on social media, like send them a message one day and just be like, hey, like I really admire you. I really want your feedback on what I could be doing to get like involved in conferences like that. I guess like go the mentorship route a little bit, because some people, like most people, are going to be very receptive to that kind of thing. Might not get a response, but like at least you tried. So I mean, at like a high level, those are my recommendations. But I'm happy too to send out resources after this, and you can possibly share them with anybody that listens today or whenever.
I know I wouldn't stretch the space very long because you have already spilled liquid gold through this particular Twitter space. Through your answers, by the way, Britt, you've been absolutely awesome with all the answers. So
Thank
I'll
you.
just come to few of the questions. One thing is what to do when the CFP gets accepted. What are the next steps?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, first of all, definitely sharing it, making sure that you're posting about it on social media, that you tell people that would be interested in it, that you're putting the word out there that you're presenting at this event, whatever it's a conference, a meetup, whatever it happens to be. So I would say, first of all, share. Second of all, start preparing. Make sure you have if you need a slide deck, start working on it. You really do not want to wait last minute for this. It will end up usually happening just because of how people are, but I would strive to not do that. Try to put aside some time every week to work on your slide deck if you have a nice window of time. If you don't have a nice window of time, then you probably want to get it done maybe in a night or something, whatever. But making sure you have a slide deck and having somebody else review it. I mean, even if it's just like a friend, like your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever, having them take a look, a coworker that you really think is insightful, having them, take a pass at it. They don't have to do something really thorough, but honestly, just making sure that you don't have any glaring typos or huge mistakes or any faux pas that would make you look a little bit awkward presenting, or they might be just awkward for you. You know what I mean? So getting that second perspective is huge. Also, start practicing your presentation. You want to make sure too that if there's a allotted amount of time, and usually it's they'll give you a sort of like a 30-minute window or an hour window or a 40-minute window, making sure that your talk gets very close to it. It doesn't need to get exactly there. It could go over a little bit, but making sure that you are relatively in that range is huge. And then if you find out that you have a 30-minute talk and you end up talking for 55 minutes, that gives you the ability to trim down as you need to. And then also too, looking into the logistics, making sure that you're taking care of if you have to book travel, if you have to book a hotel, do you have to take a day off work, that kind of thing, making sure that you have that all nailed down, especially if it's DEF CON in Vegas or whatever, or a big industry conference in a city that gets a lot of conferences, like Phoenix this time of year is always full of conferences. Yeah, so hotels are going to be really expensive, or can you look into an Airbnb, stuff like that. But also just again, making sure that you're practiced, you're rehearsed, you have the right resources you need, that you've done everything in your power to prevent something going wrong the day of, because I mean that honestly could happen. And if that happens, not stressing about it, really when you get anxious about this kind of thing, it just kind of will tailspin, and it will just not make it go to your liking. So doing your best to stay calm if something does go wrong last minute, but doing what you can in your power anyway to make sure that you have everything in a place that you're comfortable with. And as well too, I did a presentation a few years ago at a conference in Seattle, a marketing conference, and it was a really informal presentation. It was more like a TED talk than anything. But anyway, it was accepted, which I didn't really think it would be, because it was a very goofy idea. But they ran with it because it was a very it was more about storytelling than it was about a technical presentation or anything like that. But I did a dry run in my apartment a few weeks before I flew out to Seattle, and I invited 5 friends over I really trusted. We got pizza and we went over my presentation and they gave me feedback, and it was an amazing, amazing resource.
What to do when your CFP gets rejected? What should be your mindset and how should you approach that?
Oh, this is a this is a topic dear to my heart because I really, really hate rejection, which is, I mean, I know like lots of people do, but like I have like hardwired my life to avoid some rejection, which is, not necessarily a healthy thing. But anyway, going back to the question, rejection sucks, obviously. No matter what it is, if it's like losing like a job offer, like being rejected from a conference, being rejected from whatever, it's going to sting a little, unless you're like an amazingly resilient person that can like stand up and brush yourself off and be like, this is not that big of a deal. But, in the time that like you are disappointed or whatever, I would say, first of all, be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up too much about it. I mean, use it as a learning experience. Try not to get too like down about it, whatnot. I just say that because I know, as somebody who's very rejection sensitive, how I get. So I'm just hoping that someone else out there can relate a little bit. But also too, like, again, using it as a learning experience. If they don't offer you feedback, because sometimes they will offer you feedback, it really does depend on the conference or the event that you submitted to. But if they don't offer you feedback, I would just go ahead and request it. Like, ask, hey, is there something I could do better going forward? Or maybe like, what was one thing that really like you felt like really like my CFP could use more of, or I could have done this better. I mean, use that as a learning opportunity. You don't have to throw away like the CFP. You don't have to get like totally discard your idea. Just use that as an opportunity to like build upon it and make it better for the next time around. Maybe it's not that event again, but it's another event, and just keep going at it. And there's a level of resilience, and I would not say like throw yourself back out there after you've been rejected. I would say take some time to just learn from it and just be like, okay, it's not the end of the world. And honestly, like, we all get rejected. I mean, writers get rejected from magazines and publishing places and whatever. People get rejected all the time. It happens every day. And it's important to have some resilience against it, and just also see those rejections as like little lessons. But like, okay, like, I didn't get accepted this time, but I'm going to do what I can to make sure I get accepted next time. Or maybe not next time, the time after that. And also, too, you might want to look into how, like, exclusive these conferences are that you're looking at, or how competitive they are, because some conferences are going to be really hard to get into, and if you are like throwing your hat into the ring for those conferences or those events, you just got to realize that like there is a small chance of you being accepted, and just being okay with that. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but some places are going to be more lenient than others.
So, some conclusion that you would like to draw up through the entire conversation we have had?
Yeah, I mean, definitely going back to what I said about being diligent about what you're doing, making sure you're putting thought into it, and giving yourself plenty of time, like making sure that it's not a rush, because when you rush something, you're not going to do your best. So if you are able to like give yourself time, like, go through a few reiterations of your CFP, make sure you're very comfortable with the subject material, make sure you know the event you're submitting to well, make sure you know what they're looking for, that you've adhered to their guidelines. And when you're writing, your CFP, opt to be clear and direct and informative. You can be funny or like, really like serious or whatever, clickbaity if you want to. If like you have the right content, that's like a special effect that comes afterwards. It's not the actual movie that you're trying to watch. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, just diligence, thoughtfulness, giving yourself time, also to like being aware of what you're submitting to, and being able to take whatever happens with, like taking the right next steps. Like if you get rejected, like learning from it and making sure that you have better content going forward. And maybe, I don't want to say better content, but like better geared content, I guess, more customized, more tailored content going forward. And if you get accepted, like what are your next steps? Like you need to start like building a slide deck. You need to start like making sure that you have a good handle on your presentation and whatnot. So yeah, seeing what other people are doing and just trying to like observe, learn from that, like see what CFP has been accepted in the past. Check out like DEF CON's resources, other major conferences resources, and yeah, I mean, good luck to anyone that's listening to this and wants to present. It's definitely not an easy decision, but it's if you get accepted, it's a really, really rewarding one. And even if you don't, like, it's still a great opportunity. You can say that you did that at the end of the day, and putting yourself out there is like very, 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 very hard. And I think anyone that tries to do that should be commended.